Okay, cool. So I'll start that. Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, let me start again. We are recording the interview of Dennis Wince. The interview is being conducted by David Morse from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the New Media Incubator at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. It is 3:45 p.m. on October 12th, 2017. Okay, so starting off, Dennis, let's start off with when and where you were born.
I was born in March of 1965 in Charleroi, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And who are your parents?
My parents are Dennis and Darla Wince, and they grew up also in the same area. It's western Pennsylvania, just near Pittsburgh.
Okay. And what were their occupations?
My dad ended up owning an auto and truck repair garage, and he owned that for about 15 years. And my mom worked with him as sort of bookkeeper, receptionist.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any siblings?
I'm the only child.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what did you do prior to joining the military?
So I was in high school. In high school, I was a good student and a baseball player in high school.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. What got you interested in baseball?
My grandfather would tell me stories. He grew up in the 20s. He'd tell me stories about Babe Ruth, and there was a Yankees minor league team in the town at the time. And he told me about sneaking in, watching them, and things like that. And then I got to be, being from Pittsburgh, I was a big Pittsburgh Pirates fan, and just got into baseball through my grandfather mostly.
Oh, okay. Now, so you graduate high school.
Mm-hmm.
What time was this?
So I graduated in 1983. Back in 1979, I went to see a cousin of mine graduate from the United States Military Academy at West Point. And at that point, it's like, wow, that's sort of what I want to do. And from when I was 14 years old, 13, 14 years old, I knew where I wanted to go to college. And I applied. Actually, I did not get in initially, but I was accepted to the United States Military Academy Preparatory School. So I went there and spent a year there. And actually, I got in for baseball. And I went to the West Point Prep School, played baseball there, and ironically hurt my arm, and went to West Point the following year in 1984, and I never played baseball at West Point after that. So.
Oh, man. Now, so you were around 14 when you seen, it was your cousins?
Yes, he graduated in 1979.
Okay. You make the decision that you want to graduate from West Point or go to college at West Point. What kind of preparations did you have to make starting at the age of 14 to meet that goal?
It's funny. I was raised in a very disciplined house. However, I think my teachers and friends would not say I was very disciplined. But that was actually part of the attraction for West Point for me, was to make sure that I had a guiding principle behind me to sort of keep me on the straight and narrow. Like I said, I had a lot of fun in high school, but making sure I was ready physically, obviously mentally, keeping good grades in high school and things like that. Playing sports, played basketball and baseball, with baseball, like I said, being my primary sport. And then just being involved in a lot of community activities and things around the community, and doing a lot of reading, preparing myself, like I said, the mental aspect of joining the military, and also the physical aspect of joining the military as well.
Can you briefly describe the requirements that it was going to take to be at West Point to get accepted?
Yeah, so you have to have a congressional appointment. That was one of the things. However, you had to have high academics going in, graduated somewhere near the top of your class. and high SAT scores. And then they looked at you as a whole person concept, meaning that you not only had to have the academics, but you also have the physical aptitude, usually some sort of a sport, that you played, that you excelled in, and then the civic aspect, the community involvement, things that you did around your community to make that a better place.
Yeah. Wow. So, not getting accepted the first time, but you did get accepted to the prep school. What were the differences, or I guess what was it? I guess what were the differences? What was it that made you want to continue on, knowing that you were going to this prep school?
So the prep school, it brings in half the people were mostly athletes like myself that could use a little bit more academic and athletic focus, and then the other half were people coming from the Army who may have been away from academics for a couple years. So that actually helped me out a lot, because it got me acquainted with people that had been in the Army 2 or 3 years potentially, and they taught me a lot about the Army and what to expect from the Army, and it actually just made me even more excited to be a part of the Army and go to West Point. So I really found that I excelled in the military aspects of my year at West Point, or at the prep school, and it really did a great job preparing me for West Point. And when I went to West Point, I wouldn't say West Point was easy, but it was much easier after that year of preparatory school.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. What did your family think that you had made this decision and followed through with this?
Yeah, I think obviously my family was very proud of that. I didn't come from a big military family. My father did not serve in the military. I had a cousin that went to West Point, but other than that, I wasn't from a big military family per se. But they were obviously very proud. They obviously knew the risks involved in doing something like that as well.
Yeah. So how long was your training altogether, or your schooling?
So I went to West Point for 4 years. I graduated in 1988, May of 1988, and I came out of there with a degree in mechanical engineering.
Okay. And from there, did you have any additional training that you had to go to?
Yeah, so as a lieutenant, so you come out as a lieutenant, and then you went to the officer basic course. I chose my branch in the Army as infantry, and went to the officer basic course. While I was at West Point, I also went to the airborne course, so got to jump out of airplanes as a cadet, and then went to Ranger training after that. So I earned the Ranger tab, graduating from that school, and then from there I went to my first duty state assignment, which was in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii.
Wow. So, man, I gotta piece all this together here. Mm-hmm. So you went to West Point, and at West Point you went through Ranger?
No, at West Point I went to airborne school.
Airborne school, all right. So it was airborne school. You did some jumps. How many jumps did you complete?
5. You get five jumps to complete your qualification.
Okay. Okay, so you did the 5 jumps, and then you picked infantry from that point.
You went to officer basic course, so it was your basic course where you learn infantry skills, and that was I think 19 weeks was the length of that. Then I went to infantry or to Ranger school after that at Fort Benning, Georgia, and that was 58 days long.
Wow. Okay. And through any of these trainings, what stood out the most to you? or what instructor stood out the most to you?
I think what stood out to me the most was just you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about how hard you can push yourself. Those initial trainings really taught me to trust, you know, all the safety aspects about the military. I mean, you're jumping out of an airplane, you think, wow, that's, you know, but you also know that, you know, thousands of people went before you and have done that. So you really learn to trust the training. And, you know, as a brand new lieutenant, you knew that you would be training soldiers. So, you know, you knew that you would have to impart that same trust on the soldiers that you trained. But, you know, some of the things that we did in our initial training were like I said, pretty, looking back, it was, you know, some pretty high intense training. But when you went through it, you really didn't feel like it was. You felt like it was safe. You felt that you were, you know, like I said, you learned how to push your mind and body, because your body told you at times, especially in Ranger School, your body told you to stop, but your mind, your mind told you to stop, but your body, you just pushed through those things, and it was pretty amazing. And like I said, my Ranger tab is one of the things that I am very proud of. One of the things they say about Ranger School, it's 58 days of taking shit, followed by a lifetime of talking shit. And like I said, I'm very proud of that, just as much as I am above graduating from West Point.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm Air Force, but I know that, you know, across all branches, and anybody with that Ranger tab, you know, we all know that there's a lot of respect that's given to those that carry that, and that's pretty cool. So you're all done with training, and one question I do want to ask that deals with all this training. So you did pick infantry, come from West Point, go through all this training. Is it because you picked infantry, the route that you took, that they were molding you to be a leader? Could you have come out of that and just been a mechanical engineer?
Well, I would have. You pick a branch when you go into the Army. You know, I would say infantry is the hardest branch, and I like pushing myself. So that's why I picked infantry. Also, I felt that I could best use my leadership skills in doing that. It wasn't me and a machine, it was me and soldiers for the most part. Obviously you have your assigned weapon with you, but it was, you know, more, you know, working with people versus, you know, technology and things like that.
Right. That's great. That's awesome. Okay, so all done with training. And this was what time? Around
89.
89.
Yeah, 89. Got to my unit in Hawaii.
Okay.
In 89.
All right. So first duty was in Hawaii.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you went through all of that, and then you get Hawaii.
Yes.
Tell me about Hawaii.
So I was there for 4 years. We trained really hard. The Hawaii landscape is straight up and straight down. It's basically you know, a mountain, and you know, we did a lot of operations, you know, in those mountains, and you know, with 100 pounds of gear on your back, going up and down, you're always wet and always tired and always hot, and you know, but it was a good time. I got a chance to deploy actually right when I got there to Japan for 6 weeks. We did actually winter warfare training, and you know, coming from a colder weather environment before Hawaii, I never really, but when I went to Japan, I never really acclimatized to the Hawaiian climate. So when I went to do this winter warfare training, I was fine. It was cold, but there were some guys that were there that were really freezing. Their teeth didn't stop chattering for the whole 6 weeks we were there. But it was a good way to you know, get indoctrinated. I was a platoon leader. You know, get indoctrinated with my infantry platoon. We did a lot of great training, winter warfare training. We did live fires on skis and snowshoes. So it was like I said, a really fun exercise, and we got to work with the Japanese Army as well.
Wow, wow. Did you notice any major differences between your unit and the Japanese Army?
Some of their weapons were a little bit more antiquated than ours. However, their radios and things like that were ahead of ours at the time. So just thought it was, you hear stereotypical things about Japanese, and I think that the stereotype went into their army, and that like I said, some of their weapons weren't as good, but definitely their electronics, and they were very well disciplined.
That's awesome. Yeah, it worked well together.
Yeah, very well, and like I said, it was a great deployment.
Good, good. So during the 4 years there at Hawaii, you said you stayed busy, did a lot of training in the mountains and stuff like that. What did you do for recreation?
So being a lieutenant, you didn't really get paid as much, and Hawaii was a high cost of living area. So I was married at the time. I got married right out of West Point to my high school sweetheart. I'm still married. I'm going on 30 years this year.
Congratulations.
And so we look for cheap or free things to do. So a lot of time at the beach, a lot of cooking out with friends, biking, hiking, and just like I said, just chilling out. I guess the Hawaiian culture was sort of laid back, and you just tried to because you were working so hard during the week. When you did find time off, you just sort of tended to relax at the beach and enjoy what was there.
That's nice. Was the food different there? Did you find that
you could find anything? I mean, it was a little bit different, but it's still the United States. Except for the expense, there was really no difference.
Okay. So you're there for 4 years, and then where do you go from that point?
We went to Fort Benning, Georgia, for what they call the Officers Advanced Course. When we went there, you're there for 6 months, and you're basically learning two things: how to be a company commander, which would be my next job, and a staff officer at the battalion and brigade level. I was there for 6 months with my wife, and while I was there, I did very well in the course, graduated top few percent of the course, and I was offered to go to the Field Artillery Advanced Course at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I went there for 3 months, and my wife stayed in Fort Benning, Georgia at the time. Went there, learned a little bit about fire support, how to call in fire support and things like that. Just really advanced skills at that, and also taught part of the cross-pollination, I guess you'd say, with that course was I taught infantry school or infantry tactics to some of my field artillery brothers. So.
Okay. So were you becoming more of an instructor at this point?
Like I said, it was there to train on field artillery, but it was also to impart my infantry knowledge on the other students there. So whenever there was an infantry question that was asked, the instructor would turn to me, and I would answer that question based on that. So.
Let's see. And so how long was that training?
So that was so infantry advanced course was 6 months, and I was there for field artillery advanced course for 3 months.
Okay. And then where did you go from that point?
So my next assignment was backtracking a little bit. Was when I was in Hawaii, my wife did come down with ovarian cancer, and she had cancer for about 1.5 years. She was cleared, and my next duty assignment was supposed to be Germany. However, I sort of got a little cold feet about being so far away from family, just in case, because it was very hard being in Hawaii when she had the cancer, because you're so far away from family. So I got my assignment changed to Fort Riley, Kansas. So basically I went from Hawaii to Kansas, and it was it was a big difference, obviously. But what I did find was when we went to Fort Riley, the people there were very incredible, very down to earth. Some of the nicest people I've ever met are in the Midwest, and it turned out to be a great assignment.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of support with what you guys were going through as a family?
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, my wife is still clear of cancer to this day, but it was obviously a tough few years for us, with her with chemotherapy and things like that. And at that point, with having ovarian cancer, you couldn't have kids. And she actually, the way she actually found it was she went through she had 2 miscarriages, and that's how they actually found the cancer. So they caught it beforehand. One of our blessings with the assignment in Kansas, that we adopted our daughter in 1995 in Kansas. So that was one of my big memories of that assignment, obviously.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that is amazing.
Yeah.
That is really amazing. So you're at Kansas, and what is your official position there at this point?
So when you first go to an assignment, you're going there to be a company commander, but you start out on staff. So I was the battalion S1, which is the personnel officer. I did that for a year. Then I went to the S3 shop, which is the operations shop. So I did that for a little bit less than a year. Then I got my first command. I was in charge of Delta Company 116 Infantry, part of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. I was in charge of 14 Bradley fighting vehicles and approximately 120 soldiers. And then when we went out to the field, I would chop off one of my platoons to another unit, and I got a platoon of M1 tanks. So in essence, I had 4 M1 tanks and 10 Bradley fighting vehicles, and approximately 50 other infantrymen that came out of the back of those Bradley fighting vehicles. So our strength was somewhere around 120 people.
Now with that kind of responsibility at this point, did you have any mentors or any leaders that influenced you, or that you kind of mimicked to as you were in that leadership type role?
I tell you, I never really had one leader. I would pick and choose different traits of leaders that along the way. Some of those leaders, maybe their discipline, the way that they their attention to detail. Sometimes just natural charisma of a leader that you'd pick up on. I'm just going through the leaders, and I'm just pulling those traits that I pulled from them. I had one leader who, when I first took command, the guy did not seem. We would brief him. We would say, sir, we think you should do this, tactical decision, and he would go against us. And it's like, wow, it didn't seem like a smart decision time, but it would always bring victory. So he had an uncanny ability to make the right decision at the right time, and sometimes it was against, what you think was the right answer. So like I said, I never really had one mentor, but I really, like I said, really love picking different traits from the people that were in charge of me. And in charge of the higher units, and like I said, I think I like to think that's sort of what made some of my success and really honed my leadership skills by picking those traits from them.
Yeah, that's a really good approach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. So at this point, you're officially a commander of a large fleet.
Yeah.
What decisions are you making at this point?
So you're making a lot of decisions about the people that you work with, your soldiers, making sure that you're developing them professionally as soldiers, making sure they advance through the ranks with the proper knowledge, skills, and abilities at their level and at the next level. You're also making sure that your unit is trained for wartime, which is the number one responsibility. Now, this was also during a time of a big drawdown. That was right after Desert Storm, which I did not deploy to Desert Storm, but the Army downsized dramatically during that time. So it was very tough trying to train your unit with limited resources and things like that. So you really had to be really smart about how you did it, making sure that you trained on all echelons, at the collective level, at the battalion company levels, at the platoon levels, and at the individual level. You couldn't. So when you went out, you had to train all those levels at once versus all right, this week we're doing individual training. No, it was sort of everything all at once that you had to train to conserve resources.
Wow, man. And how much of an well, I guess that was. So, talking about the downsizing, and so you said there was a big effect on the training, obviously, and how you had to combine several of those types of trainings. What were some of the other effects that you've seen with the downsizing?
A lot of the, especially at the officer ranks, were off. A lot of officers were offered money to get out of the Army, and a lot of the senior enlisted ranks before their retirements, before that, and I saw a lot of great officers, a lot of great non-commissioned officers decide at that point that they wanted to get out of the Army, which is sad because the Army could have even been stronger, but because of the downsizing, the administration saw that was a way to whittle down the numbers. Unfortunately, when you just think of it as numbers, you sometimes lose some of your great war horses, and that's what I saw. So there's some great people who I'm still happy to keep in contact with that I saw leave the Army and did great things as civilians, but I know they could have been great warriors and helped our Army out a lot.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I myself, when I was in during a time when there was some downsizing going on, and sadly, a lot of our NCOs were took that way out, that advantage to get out early, and a lot of the responsibility ended up falling on like our senior airmen, our E4s, and stuff like that. That me personally, I was doing like a tech sergeant's job,
Exactly.
and it was just a lot of stress, and so I can completely understand that. But moving on from there, so we got through the downsize, and how long of an effect did that take before you started to see a bit of a turnaround?
It really wasn't till 9/11, until you really saw that, all right, we're gonna make our military strong again, which it's sad because at that point we were already at war, but like I said, the training was good, our weaponry was good, our tactics was good, but we just didn't have the resources to train at a high level at all times at that point.
Right. So let's talk about 9/11. Now that you mentioned it, where were you at? What were you doing during that time?
So I guess so after the infantry, or after I commanded, I was my body was sort of sore, and my next assignment I went to be an instructor at the infantry school back at Fort Benning, and at that point I trained officers to be company commanders. At that point, spent 4 years there. I also worked with international students that were coming to the infantry school to train So the international students were going through the officer basic course, the officer advanced course. Some were going through airborne training, some were going through ranger school. So whatever schools the infantry school had, we were taking people from all over the world, and that was right after the Berlin Wall fell. So a lot of the officers we were receiving were from Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Czech Republic. So a lot of them, and there were some great warriors that came out of those countries, and that was a pretty fun job as well. But at that point, I also received my master's degree in human resources, and because of that, and because of where I was physically, I didn't feel like I could continue a 20-year career in the infantry. So at that point, like I said, I had my master's degree in human resources. I switched over to human resources. It was, you called it it's functional area, human resource officer. And from there, I went to the Aviation Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, where I was the S1, which is the personnel officer for the brigade commander. And I did that. We immediately deployed to Bosnia in 1999 to 2000. Was there for just a little bit less than a year. Came back from deploying to Bosnia, and 9/11 hit. I remember this was in 3rd Infantry Division is in Savannah, Georgia. I was stationed at the time at Hunter Army Airfield. Remember walking into one of the company orderly rooms, and they said, "Hey, look, there's a plane that hit the World Trade Center." And I remember seeing another plane hitting, and as we were watching it, and it didn't register with me. How could I be watching a plane hit and the tower's already burning? How could that happen? And then you just realize, like, oh my God, that's the second plane that hit, and then it became intuitively obvious that we were under attack at that point, and it was a terrorist attack, and somebody was doing something totally despicable. At that point, our unit was oriented on the Middle East, and we had people rotating in and out of Kuwait to keep Saddam Hussein in check and Iraq in check. So our unit did not deploy to Afghanistan, the other units, because we were a 3rd Infantry Division, it's a heavy force. So they deployed a lot of light units to Afghanistan, and you were just wanting to get into the fight, but you knew that you weren't the type of unit at that point to get into that fight. And then we knew that when Afghanistan went down and they sort of got rid of the Taliban government there, we knew that our sights were set on Iraq, which was our mission. I deployed to Kuwait in 2002, end of October 2002, and at that point we knew that the invasion of Iraq was going to happen, and probably sometimes 2003, if Saddam did not meet the demands that President Bush at the time set forth. And we just went, like I said, and we're preparing from October until March of 2003, which is when we attacked Iraq.
Did you and your units, did you feel that they were ambitious, eager to get involved specifically with Iraq? Did they feel that it was justifiable and we needed to go?
I think at the time, yeah. We had a lot of people with Desert Storm veterans who knew that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction during Desert Storm, and we assumed that he still had those weapons. We know that he watching the media and watching everything, we knew that he sort of played cat and mouse with with when he would let us in to inspect the facilities and things like that. We also knew that he was a tyrant, and even though he was part of the minority of Iraq, that he kept his country in check through a lot of brutal ways. So we knew he led his country as a dictator, and he was doing a lot of bad things. So yeah, and we thought there may have been a connection at that time with the whole terrorist network and things like that. But obviously, that we didn't know for sure at that point. We just wanted to make sure that we were doing what we could to keep the world safe and keep America safe, obviously.
Yeah. So, moving forward, did you end up deploying?
Yes. So like I said, in October, we went over there, and I was handed an operations order of over 100 pages, and I was told to read this, and they said if we did attack in Iraq, here's what the plan was. So.
Okay, and what was your role? What was your job? You were a commander. You've taught people how to be commanders. All of a sudden, you are now engaging in this conflict. What's the role of a commander at that point?
So at that point, I was the personnel officer for an aviation brigade, which was a little bit different than what I trained for. However, that aviation brigade commander looked a lot to my infantry skills to make sure that because as we began the attack on March 20th, 2003, and moved up through the desert, we had to secure ourselves. We didn't have any infantry with us. We were relying on a bunch of aviators and our support guys to secure our movement up through. So I was asked to do a lot of that as we moved up through Iraq, making sure that we remained secure and our the rear echelons were free from not only any kind of attack by the Iraqi army, but any potential terrorist attack or anything like that. Also keeping track as we moved up, not only was it to keep us safe, but also to keep accountability of all our soldiers, making sure that they didn't get turned off on a wrong route, get lost. So making sure that we kept control. First 3 nights of the attack, I remember we were recovering vehicles, and vehicles that were either broke down, stuck in the sand, and we had them plotted, and we just I would take maintenance guys with us, wreckers, cranes to unload vehicles that were stuck in the sand, and we spent basically the first 72 hours of the attack accounting for our people, getting vehicles unstuck, recovering vehicles, and it was, like I said, 72 hours. I basically got 0 sleep, but at the same time we were out there in 0% illumination at night, and we were very vulnerable to attack. Because our guy, we basically took what we needed to get these vehicles recovered, and we didn't really have much security with us. Matter of fact, I ended up pulling security most of the time, guarding our guys. So I was even though I was the senior guy, moving this, I ended up being the guy to secure our as our soldiers recovered these vehicles.
Wow, that's intense. That's intense. So what were your first impressions when you started going into Iraq? I mean, I know that you say you got stuck in a lot with the desert, but I mean, we'd been there before. We'd already done that. I don't know, what were your expectations going in there?
So what I found was as soon as we crossed over the berm and went across over the border into Iraq, you sort of felt you weren't nervous, you weren't scared. You felt like you were. I felt like I was very well trained, especially with my infantry skills, and it was like, all right, here we go. And like I said, I felt like my training was great, and like I said, I knew my job, and I felt the people that I was with knew their jobs very well, and like I said, it sort of just happened, and like I said, we moved up through Iraq. One of the big things that I remember was we hit a town called Al-Nazariya, and it was that point where the Army was moving up in the western half of the corridor, and the Marines were moving up in the eastern half of the corridor toward Baghdad, and we met Marines in Al-Nazariya that evening, and we exchanged some pleasantries and just how are things going, and then we moved on. And that night was when they were attacked. The enemy came across the bridge and feigning surrender, and those Marines were attacked by these people faking surrender. And we got word of it. And that was also the time where, about the same time where Jessica Lynch's convoy made a wrong turn around that area. And she was captured with some of her compadres. So, like I said, we just passed through that area, and it was sort of strange to see that they were now behind us, but they got attacked. So some of our guys, like, wow, that it sort of became real to them at that point. The next assembly area that we went to, we were there for a few days, and that's when the major storm rolled in, a sandstorm, and it was with us for about a week, and it really slowed things down. While there, we had a Patriot missile battery with us, and in the middle of the night, it shot down a Iraqi missile coming right over us. So that was pretty intense. People think that missiles, have when they are launched, they sort of go, but the Patriot missiles don't get. It was basically boom. The launch was boom, and then it almost, as soon as you heard the boom from the launch, you heard the boom from the explosion. Wow. Right over our assembly area. So that was weird, and once again, it just brought the war sort of closer to us, even though we weren't, like I said, in the front lines. That you still had to, watch out, and like I said, make sure that you're secure. Right after the sandstorm lifted, we moved up to next assembly area. While there, and like I said, I was relying on for my infantry skills, and I was in charge of our quick reaction force. We got word that somebody was watching us. We went out. It was, they looked like they were Iraqi deserters from the army. They were trying to get around us, is what I sort of surmised. However, the story that they told was not true. So we ended up capturing them and taking them to a POW holding area so that they could be interrogated. Plus, one of them was wounded. He lost half a foot. So, to this day, I'm assuming that they got taken care of, and we definitely did the right thing by taking them prisoner. They were not very happy about it, obviously. But that was one thing I remember. The other thing I remember is about that time, we also, being an aviation unit, we had a medical aerial ambulance unit attached to us that were going forward, and they would operate what they call ambulance exchange points. So they would fly the casualties back to an area, and then they would drop off the casualties there, and then we would load them onto other aircraft to go back to the next echelon of medical care. And while we're there, I remember talking to a lot of our American casualties, soldiers and stuff like that. But one casualty that really struck me was a father, an Iraqi father, and his little girl. His little girl was pretty badly wounded, and she was covered in blood. And like I said, the Americans, we evacuated them. And to this day, I always wonder, where is this little girl? Did she make it? Did she get through? And that's, like I said, just one of the things that I remember. One of the big things I remember of the war, that looking at that father's face, because I was a father too, and the girl. It's just still think about it to this day. From there, we ended up moving up to Baghdad International Airport, where that was our final resting place. While there, a lot of the high-value targets that were captured from the Iraqi army and the Iraqi government were held in a POW holding area on Baghdad International Airport. Although we didn't see them, we were always told, there was always intel that we could have been attacked, because there was people trying to free them and things like that. So the security at our place was pretty high. We ended up redeploying at the end of July, and at that point was one of my jobs was, once again, sort of using my infantry skills. We would run logistical operations across the Tigris and Euphrates rivers back to get our supplies for our unit, to keep our unit supplied with food, ammunition, also mail runs and things like that, so we can communicate with our families, things like that. But a lot of the same roads that I took these convoys on a daily basis were the same roads where you heard of after that, these IED strikes, and we lost a lot of Americans after that on those same roads. And I just think back, it's like, wow, if I was there, for 6 more months, I could have been, on those roads. And that's, like I said, because that's when the insurgency really started taking hold. Like right when we were getting ready to leave in July was when we started getting those IED strikes and things like that. Our unit didn't have any, but like I said, that was right when, and our level of alertness went way up again as we redeployed back.
So I'm sorry, you said you redeployed?
We redeployed back to Kuwait, so we can go back to the United States at that time.
Oh, I see.
So yeah.
Okay. So how long were you in Iraq?
So October of 2002, we deployed to Kuwait. We were in Kuwait from then until March, and then March we went to Iraq, and then we were in Iraq until the end of July, until the unit that came replaced us. They showed up probably in June or so, and then we trained them up and gave them tours of the area and make sure they knew what the area of operations they were going to be covering, and then they, once we did that, then we moved back, redeployed to Iraq, loaded our stuff up on ships and airplanes, and then we flew back back to Savannah, Georgia at that time.
Okay. How well received were you when you got back to America?
It was the welcome was huge. Just all the yellow ribbons. We had President Bush came, spoke to us when we got back. We received the Presidential Unit Citation. Savannah has the biggest St. Patrick's Day parade. in the 2004 St. Patrick's Day Parade, our unit marched in that, and just the overwhelming support. And one of the big things, the women would put green lipstick on and come kiss the troops. And all our guys had probably 100 kisses, green lipstick all over. And so that was a great memory, and a great feeling to know that we were, our work was appreciated. Being away from our families for almost a year was obviously tough, but the welcome that we received when we got back was well worth it, knowing that the job that we did was appreciated by the American people. It was huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
I can't understate that.
Yeah, yeah. Was there any doubt or speculation that you guys might have any backlash from America?
No, not at the time. Like I said, we believed in our mission, and even though they did not find as many weapons of mass destruction that we thought Saddam Hussein had, I still think that they were there at one time. At the beginning of the war, there was a lot of intel that things were moving from Iraq to Syria before the war, and there were a lot of electronic surveillance that was up in Iraq, and things indicated that there were trucks and long convoys of vehicles moving from Iraq to Syria at the time. You could only surmise what was in those trucks, but my thoughts, it could have been some of those weapons of mass destruction, because we know now that Syria has used chemical weapons on its own people.
Well, I think that's great that you guys got an awesome welcome home, and I can just try to imagine what that would be like. That's great. So you're home. How much longer were you in the Army?
I was stayed in 3rd Infantry Division for one more year after that, and we reorganized and prepared them for another trip back to Iraq. At that point, I went to Washington, D.C., to Human Resources Command. It's sort of the personnel center of the Army. And I worked on their strategic initiatives group. The Army was going through a lot of reorganization at the time, and I was in charge of sort of that personnel side of that, the way we were doing things. We were now in a cycle of a heavy cycle of deployment, which was weighing the Army down. So one of the things we put in place was something called force stabilization, where you would go to a unit for a year, train up for a year, you would deploy for the year, and then you'd come back and sort of have a year of rest before that cycle sort of repeated on itself. So we were in charge of in placing that, for the Army, and also we looked at some of the way the Army did business some lessons learned from the personnel side, and we were putting some of those things in place at the time as well. I fully expected to only be there for a couple years in Washington, D.C. However, having two deployments of almost a year long before that, and my daughter now approaching high school age, and my wife, having a solid career, my family basically said we've had enough. And so I stayed a few more years there, and I ended up retiring in 2010 from Washington, D.C. area, and that's where I continue to live today.
Okay, all right, very good. Wow.
Yeah.
What an amazing career.
Yeah.
So what do you do now that you're out?
So after the Army, I went into government consulting. Worked for a consulting firm. Although I did well financially with that, I really lost a lot of that camaraderie and sense of purpose that the military gave me. And 5 years into doing that job, I reached out to a West Point graduate friend of mine who is a CEO of a large firm, and but I know that he's also involved in a lot of philanthropy, a lot of military veteran service organizations. And I said, hey, do you know of a veteran service organization that I could be a part of? And he told me about the Wounded Warrior Amputee softball team, and they had a position for an executive director. And I interviewed, and I got that job, and I've been doing that job now for the last 3 years. So even though financially it's not nearly as lucrative, it has given me that sense of purpose. It allows me to work with warriors, true warriors, that have done their time in the military, and it gives them a sense of purpose as well, traveling around the country, inspiring and educating others. We also get to work with kids who have amputations and do kids camps with them. So it is, even though, like I said, the monetary aspect isn't there, it's definitely, you could see that, you know, the fulfillment is definitely there, and working with these guys and the sense of purpose that you get from doing that, you know, harkens back to my days in the military, and the feel that you got every morning putting your uniform on. You know, my new uniform is a little bit different, but I still get the same feeling.
Sure. Wow. Do you feel like, I mean, do you get inspired yourself talking to these guys that are on the softball team, or watching them play?
Yeah, and definitely, because you look at these guys, they're missing arms, legs, plus they have a lot of injuries that, you know, it's easy to see their prosthetics, but a lot of them carry scars, you know, all over their body, burns, bullet wounds, you know, shrapnel wounds, and things like that. So knowing that, you know, that the visible isn't usually the part that haunts them. It's some of their other injuries. So yeah, it is very inspiring, and it pushes me too. You know, if you look at the guys and say, if they can do it, I can do it. And you know, getting out there and just being with them, and you know, they give you a young feel. And most of our guys now are you know, late 20s, early 30s. I'm in my 50s now, but it's nice. It's a good feeling. Keeps you feeling young, and like I said, you know, it allows you to continue service in a different manner, but you still feel like you're continuing to serve your nation in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. I know so much of what you're talking about. So, is most of your attention and focus on this veteran organization, or did you join any other veteran organizations?
I'm a member of the American Legion. So back when I was doing my consulting, I was actually coaching softball, coaching my daughter's team. She ended up going off and getting a scholarship to college and for softball. And I was also working with Wounded Warriors on transition skills out of the military. So, you know, this job is really giving me taking my volunteer jobs and putting it into that. So, you know, even though we're, you know, traveling around the country playing softball, you know, it also gives me time to mentor these guys as well and help them with their careers and, you know, things that they want to do in life. You know, we've had guys, you know, people reach out to us, hey, we're looking for, you know, we're hiring wounded warriors, so we've got jobs for guys and help guys, you know, get some opportunities they may not have had. So, like I said, it's a blessing to be able to continue to serve these guys, to serve these veterans in some capacity, and it's truly an honor to do that.
That's great. Now, kind of reflecting back on your service, do you stay in contact with? I mean, I know you mentioned a little bit that you still stay in contact with some of those that got early outs.
Yeah.
What about any of those that you deployed with?
Yeah. I you know, Facebook is a wonderful thing. So I do keep in touch with a lot of the people I deployed with. One of the sergeants I deployed with, who we really entrusted each other with our lives. He was a part of my quick reaction force. He was part of the group that captured the 4 guys that I told you about. He ended up actually leaving the military for college, but he went ROTC. So I had the honor later in life of going and pinning his lieutenant bars on him, and he's now up for major in the Army now. So yeah, just seeing him and how he's progressed in the Army, it's great. And then seeing a lot of my West Point classmates, they're now, a lot of them are generals now. One's in charge of the 82nd Airborne Division, one's in charge of the 101st Airborne Division. So keep in touch with a lot of those guys that are still in the military, and they're now 30 years in the service as of next year. So we still have a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people that have got out of the military still stay in contact with a lot of veteran service organizations. They still support our veterans. So it's really neat to see that, like I said, all the people that have gotten out of the military, out of the Army, that I've served with, that have still stayed in touch and are still patriots and warriors, to this day, no matter if they're in uniform or not. So yeah, it's great to see. It's great to cross paths with them. My West Point roommate lives near me, even though we don't see each other often as we would like to. We still get chance to go do things together. He and I are going to Pittsburgh next month to go. I'm a Steelers fan. He's a Packers fan. We're going to the game up there. So like I said, it is a brotherhood, the brotherhood of profession of arms, brotherhood of arms. And you've seen the movies, Band of Brothers. It's exactly that. And you're now a part of each other's lives for the rest of your life. And like I said, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Wow. All right. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, I just have a couple closing questions. Kind of reflecting back on just your entire service, what are some of the key lessons that you've taken out of, that you could take out of your training, out of your military experience, that you've applied to your life that have helped you?
The first thing is, anything's possible. Like I said, I've gone through some pretty incredible training throughout my military career, Ranger training, airborne training. I've done deployments. I've done operations at night in 30-ton Bradley fighting vehicles, and you learn that your training helps you. It helps you so much, and it lowers your anxiety level. It lowers your sense of fear, and like I said, you realize that you can do anything that if you prepare properly, and you like I said, you put enough thought into it. Anything's possible, and that's something that I've tried to not only impart on the soldiers I've led, but also on my daughter, and to push herself and to strive for excellence. I'm proud to say that she got a college scholarship for sports, for softball, and she graduated from college. And like I said, I'm very proud of her. And like I said, I'd like to think some of what my military career sort of rubbed off on her, even though she's not in the military. But some of those values, of service, of respect, of integrity. Those things are no matter what line of work you're in, are so very important. Learning to trust the people that you work with, and knowing that you're going to give 100% to them. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Now, thinking of your entire story, what message would you give to future generations that would be listening to this? Like, what about your story would stand out that you would love to give to them?
That have faith, in your country. Your country may not be perfect, but this is the greatest country on earth, and fighting for it, and feeling and understanding what freedom truly means is huge. I still go to the archives in Washington, D.C. and look at the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, and I tear up. And those two documents are worth fighting for, and our nation's worth fighting for. And like I said, I hope that future generations understand that freedom isn't free. There's a price to freedom, and I've seen soldiers die along the way. We lost 4 people in Iraq in our unit, and like I said, I like to think that future generations realize that their loss is for naught, and those future generations can continue fighting for that same freedom that others have died for before them.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that you feel that we need to talk about before we close?
I think I put, I've covered pretty much my career, a lot of my lessons learned, and like I said, the imprint that my service has left on me, and hopefully on other people as well. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your service, and thank you for your story.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I think it's so close.
How long do we got?
Oh, we're within the time. We went over an hour, so
I figured.
nailed that.